No.
Okay, so I'm officially recording now. And since, guys, listen up, please, in the front. Okay. So since half of my class does not have access to my teaching tool right now, it is really important that you guys are paying attention, especially the people in the back who cannot access the teaching tool. Okay, so, you don't have Wi-Fi either? Okay. Okay, I have Wi-Fi. Let me see. Check okay, this is an on-air exception. You guys can pull out your phones and make sure your Wi-Fi is working if you're connected to it. You can log into the ISD secured with your computer login when the Wi-Fi asks. Mine seems to be working. Let me close my app. Okay. My Wi-Fi is good, so I would just. Okay, so you guys just turn on your laptops and follow along as best you can. I'm not worried about it. Focus on what I'm reading. Okay. Okay. So while I have you guys here, I'm going to talk about the fine. So I don't like doing tests. I don't think they serve a purpose that works well for me. However, you guys in this class, we use something called project-based learning, where we learn your projects. It's crazy. So what we're going to do, instead of a traditional test on paper, where I'm just asking you facts about web design, I know you know those because you're practicing them. I don't need a piece of paper to prove that to me. What you will do instead is you will, for the most part, have creative freedom to make a school-appropriate web page that covers everything as much as we learned in this class, but you have to do the entire development process from generate ideas, mock-up, wireframe, execute, practice, do all that stuff, elevator pitches that we've covered throughout this semester. This is your chance to do an example of everything you've made in a final project of your choosing. So, and on top of that, after this week, this is our last unit, unit 7. After this week begins final project work time. So not only do you have finals week, you have the week of class before. So it is really important that you guys use your class time effectively, because at January 19th, all other assignments lock, and you just have your finishing touches during our finals weekdays, where we're in here for what, like an hour and a half, I think? Yeah, Devere, what's up?
Can you do it all about like the first project you did, or like?
You want to do it all about like a personal biography?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as you demonstrate to me a majority of the concepts that we covered.
We have to do JavaScript.
You can do minimal JavaScript because we're doing very basic JavaScript. We'll talk about some ways you can do JavaScript with buttons and forms today. That is probably the extent of what you guys will want to put on your final site. Okay, does anybody have any questions about how I structure my finals? There's more details and Canvas stuff coming out later this week. Yeah, Naomi.
If we distributed via OneDrive, we work on at home.
Absolutely, yes. You're not required to work on your final at home. However, I want to declare, if I discover anybody's using AI to write their web pages, that is an instant fail and a report to the principal.
What?
If I discover any of you using AI for your final to code any part of the coding,
Wait,
instant fail. Huh? It does do that. If you didn't know that, don't take advantage of it now.
That's what it used to
Okay.
be used for originally, that's what I heard.
Well, that's not what we're using it for in here, where you guys are in a learning environment.
I didn't use my part coding or.
Listen, we'll talk more in detail about AI. All I'm saying is the same AI rules in your other classes apply to this class as well. So AI is not allowed because it is cheating. It's plagiarism.
We use AI to help us generate forms, to help us figure out what a line would mean.
You can use AI on a case-by-case basis to help you get started, but you have to do the work. You have to do the troubleshooting. I don't want to get a bunch of AI pages, okay? Just for full disclosure, on the AI front, I do use AI. I don't use it to make my pages, but I use it to explain stuff when I get stuck. I use it to give me ideas if I need to get started. I'm not against AI as a tool. You just have to know how to use it effectively. And you still have a big wrinkly brain that is going to last a lot longer than the internet will. So keep that in good shape. Okay, that's my AI spiel. Let's talk about function declarations, which is another one of the main kind of keystones of JavaScript, which is what allows your programs to actually begin happening. So I'm going to go to File, Open Folder. This is where the code along is starting to begin. I'm going to go to my 6th period web design and then open up the Unit 7 folder that we made earlier this week. So if you remember, this was our 7.1, where I was talking about how to attach your scripts, how to change it by get element by ID. We did a little bit about variables. We did a little bit about console logs. We did some basic sort of setup on functions and variables, that key concept to JavaScript as a whole. We're going to expand on that today and start configuring our own functions, which works a little bit similarly to console log and document.write, but you can get more advanced once you have an understanding of how to begin these functions and things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my 7.2 index and style sheet and JavaScript. I'm going to go through this fast because we've made tons of setup pages. The only thing that's different now is we have to attach a JavaScript. But I'm going to go fast because we've done this plenty. You should know how to do this by now, and I can help you if you need. But I'm just going to go through this for the sake of time. So I'm going to right-click New File, 7.2 index.html. Make sure I spell it right. Start that out like I normally do. Not like that, HTML5. I'll come back to that. I'm going to make my style sheet for 7.2, 7.2 style.css. And then I'm going to make my 7.2 main JS file inside of the script subfolder, 7.2 main.js inside of the scripts folder here. Okay, now I'm going to connect those like we normally do. I'm going to connect my Zelda link style sheet first, link, enter. So it's going to give us rel equals style sheet and href. Start with the subfolder and then the file name. After that, you add type equals text/CSS. And then I'm going to add a version number on line number 9 here, right underneath the title. V1, highlight that, control question mark to make that into a quick comment so I can keep it hanging out for later. That's stuff we've all done before. The new one, to attach a JavaScript file, to attach our 7.2 main.js. And if you look at my tab structure on my VS Code, it's just the 7.2 files to keep me focused on this assignment. I'm going to write script, but not just script, SCR, there we go, script :src, and I'm going to hit enter, the second option that pops up when you start typing a script tag. Start with the subfolder just like on the style sheet, main.js, and then we're just going to leave the content section of those two tags blank so that our JavaScript file is attached to the body. We're still keeping our JS attachments in the body as compared to the brain or the head for now, while we're still kind of figuring out how everything works. So I'm going to hit enter after my body tag on line number 11 because I want my script to be at the bottom of my document flow. I want the script to be one of the last steps in the website's recipe so that it has enough information to go off of in the top. Last thing I'm going to do in the speed round is I'm going to go back to my home page and use an anchor to connect my 7.2 index back to my table of contents. And then we're going to slow down and get more into function declarations here in a second. Oh, I'm still inside the, there we go. 7.2. This is all stuff that we're used to. The only thing that's new is this script src, but it behaves exactly the same way as a Zelda link. It just goes at the bottom instead of in the brain. Yes.
What's the way to get the stuff to do it for you? Where you can press like enter and it.
You just type instead of as a tag. So if I wanted a link, I type the word link and then hit enter. And enter is going to automatically fill it out with what you need. Or you can click on the wrench icon. Anytime you see the wrench, it should autofill with some defaults. Yeah, Justin. Oh, V1, I typed out the numbers or the letters, sorry, the phrase V1, just one layer over, and then I held control question mark. That's a quick comment. It works in all the languages and is dependent on whichever language you're in. And I just put my version number right in the head underneath the title. Is where I like to put mine. Okay, I'm gonna name this B Blakeney P6 7.2. If you want all we're gonna focus on for right now is the JavaScript. So if you're not quite set up yet, that's okay. I can help you in a second, but I do want you to focus on the JavaScript portion because this is a majority of our code along today. All right, so I'm gonna close my home page since I'm not using that, and I'm gonna make my way over to my main.js folder, or my main.js tab. That's the most important file in the current state. Let me pull up my notes here. Give me 1 second. Pause for effect. Just make sure that if you want to check while I'm opening my notes, that your file folder looks similar to mine and your HTML looks similar to mine. If it does, you are in a good spot to start talking about functions. Agenda. Okay. Give me 1 second to get these pulled up. Open with Notepad. Okay. Gotcha. Okay, perfect. I'm ready to go. So I'm working my way back to my JavaScript folder or my file. You should be on there with me. The most common, also the most basic, like the most introductory way to introduce a function in JavaScript. If you think about that term in math, right? It's a set of algorithms or executions or whatever other buzzword. It all means steps. When certain things happen, these steps will occur. So to start setting up our certain steps, you start with the word function. It should turn kind of this oceany blue, this jeansy, denim-y blue when you've done it right. And there'll be a little red squiggle and our JavaScript is mad because we're missing some key parts of a function declaration. We're just saying it out loud, right? After you write function in a JavaScript file, you have to name that function and put parentheses at the end of the name. Now you can put this name to be whatever you want it to be, but I like to do mine the boring way and have them be specific to their function so that I know what they are working or what they're doing later on. So today, because we're focusing on creating buttons on our web pages, the easiest way to get your user to interact with stuff, this function is going to be specific to when I click the button. So sticking with that camel case, remember we start lowercase and then every space in between is a new capital letter. So all lowercase button, capital C click. At the end of button click, I'm going to add an open or empty pair of parentheses. And this is going to complete the starting, well, actually after that, I need a curly bracket like CSS. But after I've done function, my function's name with open parentheses and curly brackets, I'm ready to start writing instructions that my computer can interpret when my user does something. So you should look something like this at this point. So what we do now inside of the curly brackets is start writing what we want button click to actually do. What do we want to execute? That's what that exe stands for when you download a program. What set of instructions do we want to happen when the button is clicked, when function button click becomes true? Just like 7.1, we're focused mostly on that document. So that's the first step, is to look at the HTML document and figure out what to do from there. So with the document, what we're going to do is get element by ID. Make sure you spell element right, E-L-E-M-E-N-T, B-Y, capital Y-I-D. Sorry, I confused myself there. Document.getElementById, by ID, and then a parentheses and quotes. This is the part that we're going to want, or what element we want to get from the HTML. Currently, we don't have any elements with IDs in the HTML, so I'm going to set this first and then go build a landing zone for this function to attach to here in just a second. So we're going to call this, inside of these quotes, color change. All lowercase color, capital C change, no spaces. This is the bones of our function here. Let's break it down. When the function of button click happens, focus on the document, elements with the ID of color change, and then that's the current set of instructions that we've written. So if we're changing the color, we're changing the style of something, right? JavaScript functions, each step along the way is typically separated by a period. So if we're going to change the style, we need to tell JavaScript that that's what we're changing. So with the documents, elements in the document with an ID of color change, next step is to change their style. Okay, so CSS, remember we move from general to specific, select a property value. after style, what are we actually changing about the button? It's going to be color. So we're getting through all of our steps, all of our executions inside of JavaScript here. We have document, get element by ID, color change the style, change the color. What do we set the color to? This is the most specific part. This is the valued portion of CSS. JavaScript loves spaces. It's hard to switch between HTML and CSS. Hearing me say all semester, no spaces, no caps. Now we're using just spaces and weird caps, right? It's a little different. But what you do is once you finish your set of instructions with our document all the way down to change color, space equals space, quotes, and now this is where you set the value like you would in CSS. So you could set it for a name. I'm going to do red. Or you could set it to a hex code. You could set it to whatever you need it to do that works in CSS. As long as it's inside of these quotes and separated by spaces after the equal sign, it will do what you need it to do. The final step in declaring a set of instructions inside of a function is to add a semicolon. That's not a semicolon. A semicolon at the end of each time you want it to stop doing something. So this is our ending point. We've accomplished our goal, semicolon. Kind of put a pause on it. Okay, your JavaScript should look something like this. Again, while you're copying it down, I'll break down the pieces of what the computer's interpreting this instruction that I've given it here. I'm looking for a function with a name of button click. All right, when that condition becomes true, whatever's inside of these curly brackets is going to be executed. The program is going to run. Focus on the document, looking for elements with an ID of color change. All right, when that becomes true, I'm going to change their style, and then I'm going to change their color to be whatever the user sets it, or whatever the program dictates or says that needs to happen. So now what we need to do is give this a landing zone of some kind inside of the HTML so that it actually has structure to apply to. So I'm going to go back to my index page and go above my script element. Should be on line 12 here, arrow or tabbed over one time. I'm going to create a button, which is an easy tag to remember because that's exactly what you type. So button, enter. It's a start and end tag. It is not a void tag. It needs both start and end. And I'm going to put click me. This is going to behave similarly to an anchor where it needs content to click on in between the start and end tags. And if I were to go live right now and pull this over, you can see that I have some default styling on the button, but when I click it, nothing happens. The second part of a function is to call it after you've declared it. So you've given the computer the instructions. Now you tell the computer when to do the instructions. So what we're going to do that is we're going to add a little bit of extra information to the start tag of the button here. So I'm going to go inside of my start tag, hit space, and then I'm going to add, after that, we need the ID specific to what our JavaScript says, which is color change. So I'm going to go ID equals color change in exactly the same case. So exactly the same capitals and lower cases as this right here, because it won't work otherwise. We're going to have that ID of color change attached to the button. So now if I go back to my output, it should turn red, right? Not yet. We've not added the last step, which is the event of on click, which is exactly what it sounds like, just like button is exactly what it sounds like. So if I pull up our, I need to update your guys' thread real quick. So we'll do this live, as you can see. Give me just a sec here. Forgot I did not do this morning. My apologies. You'll just need to refresh your canvas here in just a second. So if I go back to my web design, let's go into second period and grab their links. There's a whole bunch of links today that are super helpful. So we're going to edit this. Control AC. Okay. All right. So once you guys refresh your canvas, you'll be able to access this thread, but I'll show you what I want you to focus on and walk you through it so you know how to find it later on. If you go into the replies, there's a whole bunch of stuff on buttons, inputs and forms, which we'll get into, the W3 for JavaScript functions, And then these two right here, on click and on load. These two things are known as events. So when these things happen, then we can make our specific functions be called back when we need them to. So if you click on click, it's another attribute that you can add most of the time to a button, but you can add it to any HTML file. On click means when that element is clicked on, then the function happens. So we're going to add that to our HTML right now. You go back to your HTML and go after the ID of color change. You can see we're still inside of the start tag for button. We're going to add the on click event equals, and then this is where the name of our function with the parentheses included will go. So go back to my main.js. It's called button click parentheses. I'm going to put exactly that in the quotes here, button click parentheses. And now this button with an ID of color change on click is going to run the button click function. This corresponds, if I split my screen here. Okay, let me split my screen. There we go. It's going to correspond with ID of color change, style color set to red. So now in theory, when I run or when I go back to my output, when I click on this button, it's going to turn red. And you know yours is correctly configured once what is this? Oh, it's focused. Once your button turns red. I'm going to add some optional CSS real quick before I let you guys, or before I have you check your notes. If you go into your style sheet, you can add an asterisk as a universal selector like this, which will affect just every single part of the document. It's similar to HTML, but it just works a little bit better because it's a little bit shorter to type. I'm going to set my margin and padding to both be 0 so that it cuts some of the white space. You absolutely do not have to do this. And I'm also going to set my font size to be something a little bit larger, like 125%. And that will also just check and make sure that my CSS is working so that you can see a little bit better what I'm having you do. And it shoves the button directly into the corner of the screen. Actually, I might even go a little bit larger. 125. Let's try 175. Last time I went to 200, it was like massive. Okay, that's pretty big, but it's easy to see. So when I click me, it becomes red because we wrote a function that makes that so. Another type of event, or if you want to check your HTML real quick, this is what mine looks like. Check it against yours. Okay. I'm going to make my way to the CSS file. All right. Here's what my CSS looks like. This is optional, but if you want it, you can have it, or check it, I mean. Okay. And then the most important part, I'm going to go to my JavaScript, the function that we just configured. This is a good time to introduce commenting, taking notes on the thing that you're changing. I'm going to put my arrow key at the front of function and then hit enter. And above that, I'm going to write a little description that says this makes the button change color on click. Like this. Yours doesn't have to be that long, but as long as you write a comment that you know what it means, you can control question mark that and comment it out so that when you reopen this JavaScript file, you know what this function was doing. This seems a bit silly to write a note like this on a function where everything's all contained in one line. But the more advanced you go in JavaScript, the more confusing and complicated your functions become. So it's easy to get lost and helpful to make notes like these so you can find it later on. Okay, now we're going to practice functions again. We're going to write another one, but this time instead of the onClick event, we're going to write one for the onLoad event, which is exactly what it sounds like. When the HTML page loads, something's going to change. Okay, so to declare a function, we type that out, and then we give the function a name. What did I do in the previous classes? Let me see real quick. Okay. I think I did function onLoad. All right, this is our onLoad function. Curly bracket, enter. The only thing I want to happen on a load is I want to write an alert, not an argument. I want an alert, which is a pop-up on your browser. Parentheses, quotes. Now, whatever I put inside these parentheses and quotes is what's going to be inside of the pop-up box. So I'm gonna make it go, scared you. Because it's gonna pop up when the function onloads, right? So functions can be as simple as this. Alert is one of the more simple functions that may be a little bit annoying for the user because it's another thing to click on that blocks the page, but it is something that you can quickly convey important information, like maybe your site's under maintenance, maybe you are, if you're doing some kind of scheduling, you're unavailable. Alert is a great way to quickly communicate that because it blocks everything else out. So in order for this function onload, which I'm going to add a comment right here, onload alert pop up. I'm going to comment that out so I know what this function is for. I'm going to go back to my HTML page, slowly but surely, to make sure that your JavaScript looks similar to mine. Okay, I'm working my way back to index. Okay, here we are. Onload, if you go into the thread, onload behaves very similarly to onClick, but it's when the page loads whenever you refresh it or load it for the first time. And it's usually attached to the body tag. So what I'm going to do is attach it to my body start tag. The same way I attached onClick to the button, I'm going to add an onload for the onload function like this. And now when I load my page, you can see my Firefox in the top is blinking because there's some type of alert. You can't really see it on the projector screen, but you can see it on the Zoom room. If I go back to this output right here, because this is where my output tab is, and I go back to 7.2, you notice there's a little loading bar right here. It's because my alerts now became true. Onload happened. It says, scared you, jump scare, right? And I can click OK. My other function still works. And every time I refresh the page, that onload is going to run because onload became true. And whatever function happens in there is going to become what happens.
Go back.
That's typically back to what? This one?
Yes, and
Yeah, I'll go back here in just a second. So the typically onload is used for more utility. It's not for use for very fun stuff. It's usually for like making your language appear correctly or your display size correctly. But it is a useful event to keep in mind while we're kind of learning about more and more conditional pieces of JavaScript here. Okay, so here's the HTML. Here's your JavaScript. And I've only got 10 minutes left in the Zoom here and 15 minutes left in class. So I'm going to quickly show you guys forms and then I'll let you, we'll talk more about 7.2 when you're back on Wednesday. It's not due until Friday, so you still have lots of time. Forms are another new HTML element that we're going to work with. If I go here and then go to the thread, let's close out of these. Forms and inputs work very similarly to lists and list items or tables and table rows. So if we look at the HTML form, this is typically what you're filling out when you're typing anything on a website, especially a login. We're not going to get that deep into how logins actually work because it's a whole set of setups, but they do use this HTML structure that is important to understand how it works when you need to use it. So what I'm going to do is above my button, I'm going to write FORM and hit enter, and it's going to automatically pull up this action attribute, but we're not going to use that. So I'm going to delete that for now. I want you guys to think of forms as containers like divs or like lists or like tables for a specific type of element that goes inside of them called input. So if you type out the word input and hit enter, you're going to notice two things. There's no end tag, and it automatically comes with an attribute of type equals text. So what that means is this is a text input box inside of this form. And if I were to go to my output here, I now have somewhere that I can put text inside of my my document. And if I refresh it, it's supposed to go away actually. That's anyway. But now I have a form that I can fill out, and we're going to add a couple more pieces of information here so that this behaves the way that I want it to. So I'm going to reduce this down to 115% so that we can see the whole screen. Okay. Any text that you put outside of the input is going to appear outside of the input box. So if I click OK, you can see outside of the input is outside of the actual box that appears to the side. Even though let's add another input here, another text type input. So input enter, and then this is input box number 2. Input is a inline level element. You can see that these two are lining up with one another. So to get around that, we're going to add line breaks to the end of our input lines here. So shift comma BR because we have some text right here, and then shift comma BR, shift period, control S. That's going to add a line break and make this appear more like what you're logging into, what you're used to when you log into something. There's a lot more data that we can add to an input, which I will show you here in just a second. The two biggest of those being name and value. So if I get rid of this text that's happening outside of the input box because it's not really helping anything, I can add some more attributes to the start tag, like name equals your name. We're going to do the same thing down here. Name equals your email. So these are going to be used for reference by JavaScript later on. And you'll notice if I go to the output, nothing changes. It took away the text, and I can still type in these boxes. And when I refresh, it stays. But if we need to reference a specific part, this is our name and email sections. We have that name option available here. The last piece is something called value. So by setting the value equals, this is going to be text that appears in the box by default. So if I go under here and I type value equals, say something like password here. When I go back to my output and click OK, it doesn't work, of course. It didn't work in first period either. Okay, let's take the name off and see if that fixes it. Okay. So what it should be saying is name equals your name. Maybe it doesn't like the spaces. Here, let's try this. Let's get rid of this. Let's do camel case on the names. And we'll do it on the email as well. Let's see if that works better. Okay, hopefully that works. Okay, it's not working, and for the sake of time, it would just be displaying text by default, and that would reload every time you refresh the page inside of these boxes here. What you can do though, is you can change the input type. If I get rid of both of these, you can just type input and see how many different options there are of inputs here. So like, for example, if I had an input type equals text, this was username. And then I did another input, but I did password this time. If I scroll all the way down to P, there's an input type password. Name is password. And ID is just a hashtag for now, because we don't have any data to go in there. Set a little text that says password on the outside. If we look at our output and refresh, it says username. So username is going to appear like it normally does. Username. But if I go to type in the password box, password, it's going to censor it. So there's some cool amount of defaults that happen, just like with most of our HTML and CSS pieces. And you can configure those really easily by just using HTML. We haven't gotten even into the detailed part of JavaScript yet. Okay, let me quickly see where we're at on the agenda. We did onload and onClick. We declared our functions. We are going to skip the CSS animations for now. We did HTML and JavaScript while we did HTML buttons and the input element, which will evolve into JavaScript forms. And we'll do assignment 7.2 work time tomorrow because we have less than 10 minutes here.
Wednesday.
Wednesday, thank you. Yes, when you guys are back. So I know I went really fast, but we have a lot more time to delve into these kind of things on Wednesday when we have some work time for 7.2. Unit 7 assignments are going to be very, very simple. Just kind of practicing the basic concepts of JavaScript. So I'm not asking you to write a novel. And I'm not asking you to write a video game for your final either. If you really want to do that, I won't stop you, but I will recommend against it in our current state. You'd be doing a lot of learning on your own. But now we can start to make our JavaScript happen when specific conditions are met, instead of just the document existing, right? Does what I've shown you make sense a little bit? I know I've gone really fast and we did a lot of content today, so pat yourself on the back for keeping up. This is confusing. This is a whole new language, right? Remember, be patient with yourself. Okay. Does anybody have any questions for the good of the order that aren't specific to their page? Okay, don't stress about this. We will finish it on Wednesday. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up the Zoom room. Thank you guys so much for listening and for being patient. I really appreciate you. I'll process this and upload it shortly. Yeah.